Automation clips are the quickest way to add movement to your tracks. If you don't know, an automation clip is a simple way to automate any parameter you want over time. So in this video, I'm going to go over my favorite tips and tricks so that you can get the most out of your automation clips. But very quickly, if you're looking for personalized coaching, check out our Producer Launchpad program. There's a link down below if you want to check it out. More info later in this video. And while you're at it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. And with that out of the way now, let's get into it. Alright, so what is an automation clip? If you've come to this video, you probably already have an idea, but let me just quickly show you. Let me load a reverb here. Let's take Comet here. And let's say I want to automate the dry wet amount, so how much reverb we can hear. I can create an automation clip, which you can see here, which is going to automate the dry wet amount of the reverb. And so an automation clip is basically a way to automate any parameter that you want. It can be any effect, any knob within FL Studio. And that's what we're going to explore in this video. So trick number one is how to actually create an automation clip. Let's first look at FL Studio native plugins. So let's say 3D Balance here, which is the automation clip you can actually see here. On any FL Studio plugin, you can simply right click on the parameter and then click on Create Automation Clip. And suddenly you have this new clip that appears. You recognize it by the little symbol here. This is a symbol for the automation clip. If you want to access all your automation clips, you can go on the left here. Under this menu, you have your patterns. This menu, you have your audio clips. And then under this menu, you have all your automation clips. So simply right-clicking on any parameter of an FL Studio plugin will let you create an automation clip just like this. The second trick is to actually create an automation clip over a specific period of time. This is a trick I learned quite late actually in my production journey. But let's imagine you had this song going all the way over here. If I create an automation clip now for, let's say the bass, let's say the EQ here, so frequency cutoff here. If I simply right click, create automation clip, by default, FL Studio will create an automation clip which spans the entire length of the song. So if you have a 5-minute long song and you just want to automate a small section, by default, FL Studio just creates this extremely long clip, and then you have to start dragging like this and zooming in, making sure it's on the right section. I've done this way too much when I was starting out. A much better way is to simply select the region that you want. So let's say we want to automate over these 4 beats here. Just select it like this. Go back to the parameter you wanted to automate, right click, create automation clip, boom. Now we have an automation clip that's just over the section that we want, and then simply copy paste. Super easy, but super handy. Next up is creating automation clips with third-party plugins. So any plugin that is not an FL Studio plugin. So I showed the example with Comet here, which is a reverb plugin. If I right click on, let's say the dry wet amount, right click here, actually nothing happens. So nothing comes up. I could right click on the out amount here. Nothing comes up either. Let's say I want to automate the cutoff frequency here. If I right click, nothing happens either. All you have to do is simply play with the parameter you want to adjust so that FL Studio understands this is what you want to automate. So let's say here, frequency cutoff for band 1. Then go over here to this icon, right click and create automation clip. And you'll actually see here at the top in gray, you see Pro Q3 bass. This is the mixer channel, band 1 frequency. So this is the parameter that FL Studio just picked up on. And if I create automation clip, now I have this automation clip for the frequency cutoff of Pro Q3. Now you can even go one step further with this. Let's say I want to automate the dry wet amount of my bass, but I also want to increase the size at the same time. So bigger reverb. I can simply tweak the dry wet amount and tweak the size amount. Go back up here, right click, and you can see here, one column here, create automation clip is for the size. But here on the right, you have last 2 tweaked parameters. So in this case, the last 2 parameters that I tweaked were the dry wet amount and the size. And so if I create automation clips, boom, I have actually 2 automation clips. One for the size, one for the dry wet amount. It might not seem like a big deal, but these small improvements can really speed up your workflow. Next up, let's see how to copy and paste the shape of an automation clip. So right here, I have a kick and bass, and there's a volume automation on the bass. So you can see as the kick is playing, the volume of my bass is at 0. As the kick fades out, the volume of my bass comes back in. So let's imagine I have this pad here. And I want to apply the same pumping effect as for my bass. Let me load up 3D Balance here. By the way, I always load up my 3D Balance as the last plugin on my effects chain. I'll tell you why a bit later. Let's right click and create automation clip. But I don't want to start copying and pasting exactly the same shape, because it's never going to be exactly perfect and it's just too much work. For the shape that you want to copy, simply right click on the automation clip symbol here, articulator tools, copy state. What I'm going to do here is simply bring it to the same length, so just one beat. Left click right here, articulator tools, and now I'm going to paste the state that we just copied. Boom, and now I have the exact same pumping effect on my pad. Super easy. Next up, let's look at how to actually edit automation clips. So I'm just going to stretch out this one a bit. If you want to add any points to your automation clip, you simply right click and a new point will appear. By default, any new points will snap to the grid. So right here, I'm on beat division. So even if I click right here in the middle, the point will actually appear on the nearest grid division, which in this case is a beat. And if I try to move this point, I simply left click and start dragging around. Even if I move left and right, you can see that it actually snaps to the grid. Now, each point has its own curve that you can define. When you create a new point, by default, it's set to a single curve, but there's a lot of different shapes that you can choose from. I've just set this point to a wave, so now any new point I add will also be set to a wave. If I change back to a single curve, any new points will now be single curves as well. One that I find really useful is the hold shape. And what the hold shape does is simply hold a given value. And now I'm sure it's going to stay at this volume here. And let's say I wanted to drop to this level right here. And now it's going to just stay at this volume. So this is super useful instead of using a single curve and adjusting here and then going here, then going to this point here, copying value, this point here, pasting value to make sure it stays at the same. If ever you touch it, then it's going to change. A much quicker way is to just use hold. That way, you know this value is going to remain constant. For any shape that you choose, halfway through, there's this tension control, and this lets you adjust the tension of the shape. Now, this is the tension for a single curve, but if I go back to my pulse, right here in the middle, I can change the frequency of my pulse. So this is always located halfway through the current shape that you're editing. If I want to move this point freely outside of the grid, I'm simply going to hold Alt, and now I can move it anywhere outside of the grid. Simply hold Shift, and now your point will only move horizontally, which is useful if you want to keep the value you have, but simply move it forward or backwards on the grid. And likewise, if you click on the point and then hold Control, you will only be able to move it up or down. Next up is deleting automation clips. Now, this is an issue many beginner producers face when they have an automation clip and then they decide to remove it. So let's say I had an automation on my fader right here. The first thing I would do if I want to delete this automation is delete it like this and delete it from the list of automation clips here on the left. And let's say I want to set it back up here. Every time I press play, my automation clip, my mixer track is jumping back to that initial value I had set for my automation clip. All you have to do is right click on that parameter and click on delete initial value. And this will remove any automation, any memory of automation of that parameter. So an easy trick, but it can be really frustrating when you're just starting out. Before we move on, I mentioned in the intro our Producer Launchpad program. On top of all the courses we provide here at EDMProd, our students were telling us that what they needed was a more personalized approach. So we developed the Producer Launchpad, a tailor-made 12-week coaching program designed specifically around your goals and your objectives. If that sounds like something you might be interested in, check out the link below to learn more and book a free call with us to see if you're the right fit for this program. But now back to the video. Another handy trick I use all the time is to copy values from a plugin into an automation clip. So let's say I have this low cut filter right here, which I want to automate. I want it to start right here and finish all the way up here. If I create an automation clip, there's no way to know the exact frequency that this point corresponds to. If you look at the top left, FL Studio just shows you percentages. So all the way at the bottom is 0%, all the way at the top is 100%. But is this point 4K hertz or 10K hertz? I have no idea. So the best way to do this is to go back in our plugin. Let's say I want to start right here. I'm going to copy this value and simply right click on this point here, paste value. And I'm going to do the same for my endpoint. So let's say I want to finish all the way up here. Right here is fine. Right click on the value, copy value, go back right here. And let's say I want to do it over, 8 beats. Right click on this point, paste value. And now these two automation points are set exactly where I wanted them. Next up is a trick to stay more organized with your automation clips. One of the main differences in FL Studio, which some people like and some people hate, is that nothing is fixed or set in stone. So I can move this automation clip up or down. It's still going to apply in the same way to my pad. I can move it, let's say over here, and now it's going to apply over this section of the pad. So in that sense, FL Studio gives you a lot of freedom to move audio clips and automation clips anywhere that you want. Nothing is fixed. The downside is that things can get very messy. But let's say I also have a reverb and a delay on my pad, which I want to automate. So now we already have 4 automation clips for just one sound, which is not uncommon. And you can already see it takes up a lot of space. So what I like to do is group my tracks. So I'm going to name the first one here to pad. This is our actual sound. I'm also going to name each automation clip, and I'm going to color every automation clip in yellow. Now you don't have to name them and color them if you don't want to. The real trick here is to group them. So I'm going to right click on delay, group with above track, same with the reverb, same with the filter, and same with the volume. And now I can simply open and close my automation clips for the pad. And so this makes it a lot cleaner because once I've set my automation clips, it's not something I'm going to be playing with and adjusting constantly. There might be periods where you want to, and then you can simply open up your automation clips, adjust what you want. Perfect, I've made my adjustment. Close, and this is an easy way to keep your playlist nice and clean. Next up is a trick to automate the volume of any element. So I mentioned earlier in the video that I always place a 3D balance as the last plugin in my effects chain. And this is for 2 main reasons. Firstly, if you set your 3D balance at the start of your chain, this is actually going to affect the way all the effects process your sound. So let's say I had a compressor. This means my compressor is going to be reacting completely differently based on the volume coming in. And that's not something I want. I want to be able to adjust the compressor exactly the way I want and then automate the volume. That way we have a nice constant compression of our sound. So here we can see the compressor constantly jumping following the volume changes. Whereas if we place the volume automation after the compressor, we get a much smoother and controlled compression. The second reason for using 3D balance at the end of my effects chain is to avoid automating the faders of my mixer. So that's something I was doing when I started out producing. If I wanted to adjust the volume of my pad, for example, I would right click on the fader, create automation clip, and start automating the volume that way. However, once you get to the mixing stage of your track, this becomes an absolute nightmare. You're going to have all these fader tracks moving up and down all the time, and it makes it impossible to simply adjust the volume of my pad. So let's say I want to keep my automation, but I simply want the volume to be a little higher or a little lower. That's going to be impossible if this fader is constantly jumping up and down. And so for the sake of your mix, please do not automate the faders on your mix. Use 3D balance and automate the volume there, or any other gain plugin that you want to use. Just don't automate the faders. Next up, if you want to add a more natural feel to your automations, you can record them live. I can simply right click here on the record button, make sure automation right here is selected. Enable recording. I'm going to select the full loop right here. And now I'm simply going to press play and adjust the dry wet amount. So now I have this pattern here. Simply going to double click on it, go right here, edit, turn into automation clip. And now with the sensitivity button here, I can decide how many points will be on my automation clip. So this is way too much. Let me bring it down. This might maybe not be enough. Yeah, something around here. I think this is pretty good. Click accept, and now I have my automation clip, which I can adjust further if I want. Next up, another really handy trick is to adjust the range of an automation clip. So let me show you here. If we look at this automation for this pad here, and we look at what's actually happening in 3D balance, we can see the volume effectively jumping down all the way to minus infinity and then back up to around 0 dB. But let's say we want to make really precise automations over a small range of values. So let's say, for example, a vocal, which you want to automate, but only over, let's say, 1 dB. If you were to do this for a vocal, you would have to zoom in really closely and adjust ever so slightly each point so that it only reflects a jump of, let's say, 1 dB. A much easier way to do this is to just change the range of your automation. If I double click on the automation, it brings up this window, which actually lets you edit much more precisely your points. But what's more interesting for us here is the min-max range here. So let's say on 3D balance, I want my minimum range to be, let's say, minus 2 dB. I'm going to set it to minus 2 dB here, copy value, and then paste value, and then paste value here to my minimum. And then let's say my maximum range is plus 1 dB. Right click, copy value, and over the max knob here, I'm going to paste that value. And now my minimum and maximum values for the automation are minus 2 dB and 1 dB. So let me show you what this means now. You can see now that when the automation clip is all the way at 0%, we're only hitting minus 2 dB. Even if I set my automation clip here to 100%, we're never going to go above 1 dB. Next up is creating invisible automation clips. So let's say we have this automation here for the volume of our pad, and I want to apply the same automation to a whole range of other parameters. I'm going to double click on the automation clip here, and under target links, I'm going to press plus. I'm going to get this warning message here. Simply press OK, and now simply go to the parameters you want to adjust. So let's say I want to adjust this. I want to adjust this. Every parameter that I tweak, you can see will appear on the list here. I could also go to, let's say, Echo Boy here and play with the mix. Once you're finished, click on the plus here again, and now the targeting has stopped. And what happened now is that this automation clip is controlling all of these parameters here, even though we haven't created any visible automations. So this can be handy if you want to create a lot of automations really fast. However, it's not something I would specifically recommend, because later on in your track, you'll have a ton of different elements playing at the same time. And suddenly you'll see these faders jumping around, and you won't be able to find any automation clip that's actually controlling it. You'll actually need to remember, oh yeah, I went into this automation clip and created a target here. Let's say it was insert 5 volume, press X, and now I've removed that link. So on the one hand, it can be handy to keep your project nice and clean, but on the other hand, it can be a bit confusing if you see parameters jumping around, but you don't see any automation clips controlling them. So if you do decide to use target links, another trick that's useful is this button right here, which says animate target link parameter. So this comes in handy if, for example, here, let's say here my delay is Echo Boy, but I've simply renamed it to delay for simplicity. So right now here I can see delay pad. If I have 5 different pads, I've actually forgotten which delay this automation clip is controlling. So I can simply click right here, and FL Studio brings up the plugin and moves around the parameter that is controlled by this automation clip. Next up, if you have a bunch of automation clips like this and you need to copy them elsewhere in your track, it can be a bit annoying to select everything and make sure everything is copied like this. What's actually a lot easier is to just select all of your automation clips and then press Ctrl G. And this has now merged all the automation clips into just one automation clip. The downside with this technique is that here, for example, I'm automating the volume. I can slightly adjust here and all the changes will be reflected here. If you do decide to merge your automation clips, well, then now you just have one automation clip. In some cases, this might be really useful, but in this case, we're doing precise automation of the volume of our pad, and I might want to adjust this later on. So I probably wouldn't group all these automation clips like this. And by the way, this also works with audio clips. Let's say I have all these kicks up here. I can simply select them, group them, and now FL Studio is rendering them to one loop here. This can be very useful if you have different drum elements. You can simply select them, Ctrl G, and FL Studio will immediately render everything to a new clip. And that's it for this guide on automation clips in FL Studio. Hopefully you found it useful and discovered a few new tips and tricks that you can implement in your tracks today. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite automation trick is. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.